Vice President J.D. Vance believed he could embarrass Jasmine Crockett on live TV, but what he didn't see coming was a $100 million lawsuit and a nation standing with her in silence. It was meant to be another intense, high-profile policy roundtable, sort that dominates cable news shows and stirs up social media for days. This particular one was held in Toledo, Ohio, organized by the National Public Forum on Economic Stability. It was a polished, formal event supported by major networks and respected think tanks. They flew in economists, business leaders, and politicians from both parties. However, the spotlight was clearly on Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett and Vice President J.D. Vance, two people completely opposite in style, background, and beliefs. Inside the convention hall, under bright studio lights and surrounded by cameras, everything seemed perfectly arranged. Moderators had gone through rehearsals, microphones were checked, and seating was carefully planned. Crockett on the left, Vance on the right, both backed by their aides. Just outside the camera's view, the room was tense. It wasn't nervous energy, nor was it excitement. It felt like everyone was silently hoping the discussion would stay respectful, but secretly bracing for trouble. The talk started with the usual topics: funding for small businesses, infrastructure, and inflation. Crockett came prepared, as always. She had stats in her binder and a quiet intensity in her delivery. Her words were sharp and clear as she posed tough questions and challenged the panel, but she never raised her voice. Vance, however, sat back casually, confident that the cameras favored him. He threw in a few jokes that drew some polite laughs from the audience. He interrupted her twice, but she ignored it. Then everything changed. About 45 minutes in, the moderator asked about racial disparities in economic inequality. Crockett calmly explained the lending gaps, historic redlining, and the long-term effects on generational wealth. She mentioned her Texas district, where many families had faced these barriers for decades. Her facts were undeniable. Suddenly, Vance cut her off mid-sentence. "What Jasmine doesn't get," he said, flashing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, "is that maybe if people spent less time making excuses and more time contributing, we wouldn't be stuck in this cycle." For a split second, the entire room froze. Crockett blinked slowly, parting her lips slightly, not in shock, but in disbelief, as if trying to confirm if she really heard what he just said. She turned her head toward him, then looked back at the moderator, who sat frozen, eyes darting nervously between them. No one asked a follow-up. No one changed the subject. The air had gone heavy, like all the oxygen had been sucked out. Millions of viewers watched from their homes, many of them tweeting before the moment had even ended. Others just stared at their screens, stunned. But it wasn't just his words that caused outrage, it was how he said them. So smooth, so casual, like a joke he had planned in advance. A few audience members let out uneasy laughs. One female panelist shifted in her chair, lowering her gaze to her notes, pretending to read. Crockett didn't reply immediately. She sat tall, hands neatly folded, refusing to give the cameras any reaction. "Not yet." Then, in a steady, calm tone, she spoke. "You're not only wrong," she said quietly, "you're reckless, and that remark will follow you longer than you think." That was it. No shouting, no dramatic gestures, just one clear, deliberate sentence loaded with something far stronger than anger. Then she calmly returned to her notes, as if the entire debate hadn't just veered into national scandal, but that single exchange, the smirk, the interruption, the words, was already spreading across TV screens, Twitter feeds, group chats, and news tickers. Her composed face, her steady gaze, unshaken and unafraid, was everywhere before she had even left the stage. Yet what the cameras didn't catch was what happened after the broadcast ended. Applause still echoed through the hall as Jasmine quietly left the stage, her staff close behind her like shadows. Though the cameras were off, the tension still clung to the air like static dot in a backstage hallway. She stopped near a catering table where half-empty water bottles and untouched sandwiches sat next to lukewarm coffee cups. A young intern, no older than 24, approached nervously, gripping her phone tightly with both hands. "It's everywhere," she whispered. Jasmine didn't have to ask what she meant. The clip was already out, there, clipped, looped, slowed down, analyzed. Vance's voice echoed in the background. "Maybe if people spent less time making excuses." Someone had added bold text, "He really said this live on TV." Other posts showed a timeline of his past controversial remarks. Some reactions were sarcastic, others were furious. A few people were in disbelief, but it was real. By the time Jasmine reached her dressing room, CNN was already replaying the clip on split screen. The panelists were speechless. One guest, a retired judge, simply stared before muttering, "That crossed the line." Inside her private room, Jasmine sat in silence. Her chief of staff, Lena Townsend, paced back and forth beside her. "Do you want to speak to the press now, or wait?" Lena asked. Jasmine looked up. Wait. There was already too much noise. Anything she said now would get lost in the chaos or, worse, twisted. Instead, she told Lena to call Brandon Hurst, her longtime attorney, not a campaign lawyer, but a seasoned legal expert from her days as a Dallas public defender. He didn't play politics, he was precise. Within 10 minutes, Brandon was on speakerphone. "I saw it," he said calmly. "Are you okay?" Jasmine leaned back in her chair. "I'm not sure." There was a pause. "Has he done this before?" Brandon asked. Lena jumped in. "Not like this, but remember San Antonio? She walked off stage because of him. The mics didn't catch it, I remember," Brandon replied. "I'll start drafting notes, but let's be clear, this won't fade overnight. It's already a wildfire." And it was. Social media was on fire with hashtags like #respect Jasmine, #Vance exposed, and #WeSeeYouJD. Journalists, civil rights lawyers, and even some conservatives were all weighing in. But what struck Jasmine the most wasn't the public outcry. It was the messages from people she hadn't heard from in years, former classmates, fellow lawmakers who had never defended her before. One retired teacher texted, "You handled that with grace. Thank you." Her aunt in Shreveport messaged, "I watched it live. I cried. You didn't deserve that." She kept scrolling in silence. Brandon's voice came through again. "Here's what I need. Every interaction you've had with him. Emails, texts, anything. I'll file a preliminary legal request tonight. Depending on what we find, this could escalate fast." Lena handed her a folder already half filled with printed documents. "We've been tracking," Lena said. Jasmine raised her eyebrows. "You expected this?" "Not exactly this," Lena replied, "but something. He always pushes too far when you're around." This time he lit the match on camera. Jasmine didn't answer. She simply stared at her reflection in the mirror. Her makeup was flawless. The glowing bulbs around the mirror cast soft light on her face, but her eyes looked weary, like something deeper than exhaustion had settled in. There was a knock at the door. A staffer leaned in, whispering, "Reporters are swarming the exit. Some want to know if you're pressing charges. Others just want to comment." Jasmine stood, adjusted her jacket, took a slow breath, and looked at Lena. "Tell them I'll speak, but not tonight." She walked out with her head high heels, echoing against the hallway floor, as if the weight of the day hadn't touched her at all. But her silence wasn't weakness, it was her move. Yet even before she reached her car, the story had already shifted from a viral clip to a full-blown national reckoning. As soon as the cameras went dark, production staff scrambled like a pit, crew unplugging wires, shutting off mics, and steering guests toward side doors. From the audience's perspective, the show was over, but inside the venue, the tension lingered, humming through every hallway of the Glass City Convention Center. Jasmine slipped past a group of technicians and entered a narrow, brightly lit service corridor. The sound of rolling camera gear faded behind her, replaced by quiet footsteps and soft conversations. She wanted just 30 seconds of peace to regain her focus, but a producer, Greg Ramirez, rushed toward her, holding a portable monitor that was still streaming the live news coverage. "Congresswoman, look at this," he gasped, showing her the screen. "Mentions of your name just spiked higher than the Super Bowl halftime peak." Jasmine kept moving forward. "Greg, turn that off before you crash into something," she said. He quickly hit the mute button but kept walking beside her. "Sorry. Just figured you'd want to see how big this is getting." "I can feel how big it is," she replied, tapping her chest firmly once. "Trust me." At the end of the hallway, a set of thick double doors led to the delivery dock. Security officers stood posted there, scanning ID badges and murmuring into earpieces. Outside, the late afternoon sunlight stretched amber stripes across the pavement. Lena Townsend stood waiting, phone pressed to her ear, one hand blocking the wind from the speaker. "Brandon's already lining up expert witnesses," Lena said as Jasmine walked closer. "Media law, defamation, reputational damage, the full list." Jasmine arched her brow. That was quick. He doesn't sleep, Lena replied, then shifted back to her call. Brandon, hang on, she just got here. She handed the phone over. Counselor, Jasmine greeted him. I've drafted an initial demand letter, Brandon said without delay. I need your approval on the wording before we file. Also, there's buzz that Vance's media team is scrambling to spin this as a heated debate that simply got out of hand. Jasmine leaned back against the concrete wall, feeling the cold through her jacket. A spirited debate doesn't start by calling an entire community lazy, she said quietly. Let's keep the language steady, factual, and above the muck. Understood. I'll email a draft within the hour, Brandon replied. And Jasmine, whatever you're feeling right now, use it to fuel you, but don't let it steer the wheel. The facts will steer the wheel. She let out a slow breath. Copy that, she said. She handed the phone back, then spotted Greg, still lingering nearby. Monitor now tucked beneath his arm. He looked uneasy, shifting his weight from foot to foot. I just wanted to say, what he said was completely out of bounds. If you want the uncut footage, I can get it, no edits, with timestamps and everything. Send it to Lena, Jasmine instructed. And thank you for speaking up. Greg nodded, face reddening, then hurried away toward the control room. Across the bay, a janitorial crew pushed noisy trash bins toward the freight elevators. The ordinary clatter of their work, the daily routine, felt strangely surreal given the storm raging beyond these walls. Jasmine watched them for a moment, grounding herself in the small, steady hum of normal life. Car's ready, Lena said, pointing to a black SUV waiting by the curb. I mapped out a side route. Media has blocked the main exit. Jasmine pushed off the wall and followed her. She reached into her bag, pulling out a small worn notebook with dog-eared pages and fraying edges. On the first line, she wrote the time for 37 p.m., then 3 words. He finally snapped. She underlined them once. This notebook held the defining moments of her career: courtroom testimonies, neighborhood meetings, private promises to voters. Today's note felt heavier than the ink itself. A security officer held the SUV door open. Jasmine climbed inside, with Lena right behind her. The interior smelled faintly of cedar air, freshener, and sun-warmed leather. The driver caught her gaze in the rearview mirror but stayed silent. He'd already been told to keep quiet. Lena checked her tablet. You've already got supportive statements from Representative Carla Whitfield in Detroit, Senator Louise Barron in Arizona, and even a retired Supreme Court clerk who called your response measured and courageous. Want me to draft thank you notes? Please, Jasmine replied softly. She gazed out the window as the SUV merged into traffic. The streets of downtown Toledo blurred past brick storefronts, graffiti splashed alleyways, diners glowing with neon open signs even in daylight. Every day, life rolled on while her phone buzzed non-stop with new notifications. She silenced it, sinking back in her seat. The engine's quiet hum and the steady flicker of streetlights gave her a rare moment of calm. Still, her mind played the scene again and again: the panel, the interruption, the mocking smirk, the audible gasp from someone in the crowd. Her heartbeat quickened. Lena noticed. You're replaying it, aren't you? Again and again, Jasmine admitted. That's normal, Lena said. But remember, you responded with facts and grace. That's what people saw. Jasmine nodded slowly. Still feels like yelling into a hurricane. Then we build a shelter, Lena replied, patting the thick folder on her lap full of incident reports and sworn statements. Every instance of Vance's off-air remarks going unchecked. Outside, the SUV turned down a quiet street lined with budding maple trees. Sunlight filtered through the leaves, painting the dashboard with shifting gold patterns. Jasmine watched the flickers, trying to guess where the next one would fall. But while she searched for peace in those moving shadows, the world beyond the car was already gathering evidence of its own. By the time Jasmine Crockett walked through the glass doors of a hotel in downtown Toledo, her name had already exploded across every major trending feed in the country. She didn't need to check her phone. She saw it in the faces around her. The woman behind the front desk met her gaze and gave a quiet, knowing nod. The security guard by the elevators, usually buried in crossword puzzles, stood up as she passed. No words, just quiet recognition. Upstairs, in the suite reserved for her team, Lena was already pulling up Twitter threads on the mounted TV screen. Ready for this? She asked. Jasmine dropped her bag on the couch and kicked off her heels. Show me. The screen lit up comment after comment, some furious, others stunned, a few dripping with that sharp-edged internet sarcasm. J.D. Vance just said the quiet part out loud. Jasmine Crockett stayed calm and composed while being insulted on national television. That's more grace than most of us could manage. What year is it again? Because that remark sounded like it came straight from 1961. One clip had already gone viral, side-by-side video showing Jasmine calmly discussing housing policies right before Vance's sudden outburst. A slow zoom captured Jasmine's face. In the exact moment after the slightest pause before she replied, that frame had already spread everywhere. Someone had even added a caption. This is what grace under pressure looks like. Another thread, this one by a civil rights attorney from Memphis, broke it down from a legal perspective. Step by step, they explained how Vance's comment wasn't just offensive. It potentially met the legal standard for defamation. They cited federal case law. The thread was now being shared by reporters, lawyers, and professors across the nation. Jasmine sat down, eyes locked on the screen. This isn't just outrage, Lena said quietly. This is deeper. Legal scholars, religious leaders, grassroots organizers, even retired judges, they're not just defending you, they're explaining what his words truly meant. Jasmine picked up her phone, scrolling silently. One message came from a college student in Oakland. Miss Crockett, I've never seen someone hold their ground like that. Thank you. Another from a woman in Des Moines. I showed your clip to my 8th grade civics class. They couldn't believe how calmly you handled it. But it wasn't just praise. People began sharing their own stories, moments when they'd been interrupted, dismissed, belittled, all disguised as debate. Jasmine read a thread by a former non-profit worker in Phoenix. He said nearly the same thing to me, only it was behind closed doors in a boardroom, not on TV. I quit a week later. Lena lowered the TV volume. Vance's team hasn't released a statement yet. Good, Jasmine said softly. Let them sit with it. Across the room, her communications director, Ari Golden, entered carrying a laptop and a stack of printed statements. I've drafted a brief social media post, something to acknowledge it without adding too much, Ari said. Jasmine shook her head. Not yet. If I post now, it'll seem like I'm chasing headlines. I need to make it clear I'm not riding this wave. I'm naming it. Ari nodded. Then I'll prep for the morning interviews. CNN, MSNBC, even some international outlets. Jasmine walked to the window. The city outside looked small but sparkling. The streets below glowing with headlights and brake lights in slow-moving ribbons of white and red. It looked peaceful from this high up, but she could feel the tremors underneath. Not just online, but in homes, workplaces, and classrooms everywhere. Didn't want this, she said quietly. Nobody thinks you did, Lena replied. Jasmine turned to face her. You know what hurts most? If I had snapped, if I'd raised my voice, or even flinched, he'd be the victim right now. That's how these stories always flip. Lena nodded slowly. But you didn't, and now people are finally seeing the actual harm, not just the reaction. Silence fell over the room for a brief moment. Then Ari broke it. We're seeing something different here. It's not just outrage for its own sake. People are connecting the dots. It's not about one comment anymore. It's about what that comment symbolizes and how often it's been allowed to slide. Jasmine walked back toward the couch, sitting down again. Her phone buzzed once more. A call. Brandon, she answered. You've seen the reaction, I assume. I have, Brandon replied. And we're already building something even stronger because of it. You're not alone here. But even as the public gathered behind her, Jasmine knew this moment couldn't live on the internet forever. It had to become something tangible, and that required legal action. It was close to midnight when Jasmine, Lena, and Brandon gathered once more, this time through an encrypted video call. Brandon appeared on screen wearing a gray t-shirt with piles of papers stacked behind him, his hair slightly messy. He looked like he hadn't stepped out of his office since the clip aired, which, in fact, he hadn't. All right, he began, adjusting his camera. We've gathered every relevant interview, panel discussion, op-ed and email exchange between you and Vance over the past 18 months. It's more than we anticipated. Lena leaned in, pen in hand. You're talking about the Fresno Town Hall, the closed-door trade meeting in St. Louis, and that podcast he did with that libertarian group in Tulsa. Brandon nodded. Exactly. He didn't directly name you, but he made an obvious jab at certain female lawmakers from Texas, who play the race card every time they lose a debate. Jasmine's jaw tightened. I remember. People flagged that one for me. I chose not to escalate it then. Brandon let out a breath. You've been absorbing all this for a long time. But last night, that was different, public, targeted, and quantifiable. There's a specific standard in defamation law called actual malice. I believe we can argue it here. Lena turned to Jasmine. You need to choose, does this stay in the realm of public discourse, or do we take it into a courtroom? Jasmine didn't reply right away. She kept her eyes on her laptop, its glow illuminating only half of her face. Then she asked quietly, do we have any record of his internal team raising concerns? Brandon nodded. Yes, 2 anonymous aides reached out today. One is even willing to testify privately. Both claim he's made similar remarks behind closed doors, sometimes even worse. Jasmine leaned back in her chair. Then we proceed. This isn't about revenge. It's about setting limits, about defining what can and cannot be said to women like me in those spaces. Brandon made a note. Then I'll finalize the lawsuit. We'll file in federal court under defamation per se. That way, we don't have to prove damage, that your reputation was harmed. Lena added, we'll also need a public statement ready, and we must notify every outlet that covered the roundtable. No confusion allowed. Jasmine stood and started pacing. I don't want this to become about attention-grabbing headlines. I want it to be about clarity. Let people discuss it, but we must lead with precision, not spectacle. Brandon offered a faint smile. You've already got that part covered. She paused by the window, arms folded. This isn't just about me, she said softly. It's for every black girl who watched that clip, wondering whether staying calm even matters if they'll be dismissed anyway. Lena's voice lowered. Then, let's make it count. Let's make sure this moment wasn't wasted. The call ended shortly before 1 a.m., leaving the room still and quiet again. Outside, the streets were empty, bars had shut down, and the city's energy had drained away like water down a storm drain. Jasmine sat alone, sipping a glass of water, staring at a legal pad on the table. On it, she wrote, "Respect is not a reward, it's a right." The phrase had surfaced during the call, somewhere between anger and determination. She circled it once. Across the room, Lena had begun a list on a whiteboard. Timeline of Vance's prior comments, expert witnesses, staff testimonies, public reaction data, flagged internal communications. We'll need everything, Lena murmured, not looking up, and it all has to be airtight. Jasmine gave a nod, exhaustion evident in her face, but underneath it was something stronger, resolve. Brandon texted 2 minutes later. Draft will be in your inbox by 6 a.m. Sleep if you can. She knew herself well enough. Her mind kept replaying everything like a courtroom transcript line by line. Not just what Vance said, but also everything she'd left unsaid, all the times she stayed quiet out of professionalism, all the slights she had absorbed because they weren't aired on national TV. That silence was over now, but if she was going to fight this in public, she needed to prepare herself for more than just legal sparring. She had to face the voices questioning her motives. By sunrise, the draft lawsuit was in Jasmine Crockett's inbox, 11 pages, single-spaced, detailed and heavy, with legal weight that grew heavier with every word. The first page was blunt and unflinching. Plaintiff, Jasmine L. Crockett, sitting U.S. Congresswoman, hereby files this complaint for defamation per se against defendant John D. Vance, Vice President of the United States, for knowingly and recklessly making false and disparaging statements that harmed her reputation, credibility, and personal safety. No embellishments, no theatrics, just facts. Jasmine sat at her small hotel desk, wrapped in a robe, glasses perched on her face, half-finished coffee nearby. Lena was still asleep in the next room, the door slightly ajar, letting in the first light of dawn. She read slowly. Brandon hadn't only listed the broadcasted comment, he had also provided deep context, documenting Vance's past behavior, the podcast jab, the incident in San Antonio, the snide remark at last year's closed-door meeting where he had muttered, "She's just another grandstander in lipstick." That one had been caught on a hot mic, but was never aired. She had ignored that one. Not this time. The draft cited for prior cases where public officials had been protected by the First Amendment, but still found liable for personal attacks, falling outside of protected speech. Brandon even included analysis from Dr. Carol Epps, a media law professor at UCLA and a top expert on defamation involving public figures. This wasn't just about Vance's comment being offensive. It was a deliberate part of a pattern crafted to publicly humiliate her and diminish her character. In a setting where power imbalance was clear, she wasn't challenged on policy, she was degraded, made into a spectacle. At the end of the document were 4 signed declarations, one from an ex-campaign staffer who had heard Vance mocking her in private, one from a policy advisor who had emailed him concerns after the Tulsa podcast, one from a sound technician in St. Louis who recorded the infamous hot mic moment, one from a retired federal judge, stating Vance's remarks were a blatant violation of public discourse standards. By 6 a.m., Lena woke up tired but sharp. "You read it all?" she asked. Jasmine nodded. "Every word. You okay with it?" Jasmine didn't reply at first. She shut her laptop slowly, her fingers resting on it. "I'm more than okay with it," she replied. "We're not asking for an apology, we're demanding accountability." Lena poured coffee. "You want to file today?" "Yes, and I want a public statement ready exactly 1 hour after it's filed. No leaks, no press tips. Let the filing speak first." Lena grabbed her tablet. "Drafting now." Meanwhile, Brandon was already coordinating with the Cincinnati court clerk since the event had occurred there. By 8 a.m. Eastern, the complaint was electronically filed. By 8:22, the case number became public. By 8:45, it was in the media. It started quietly, a courthouse reporter's tweet. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett files $100 million lawsuit against Vice President J.D. Vance over remarks during Tuesday's roundtable. That tweet exploded in minutes. Journalists from every major outlet scrambled for the full lawsuit. Within 10 minutes, headlines flooded the web. Congresswoman sues VP over live insult. J.D. Vance hit with $100 million defamation suit. Crockett seeks justice after broadcast sparks national outrage. Back at the hotel, Jasmine stood before a mirror. She was dressed in a deep blue pantsuit. Her makeup was soft, her expression unreadable. Lena sat nearby, scrolling through the media frenzy. "They're trying to get a statement from the VP's office," Lena noted. "So far, no response." Jasmine fastened her jacket calmly. "Let them scramble. I'm not putting on a show." She turned from the mirror and picked up her phone. At exactly 9 a.m., she posted one sentence on her official X account. "Respect isn't a privilege, it's a standard. And I won't let mine be erased." That post alone got 80,000 likes in the first hour. By 10 a.m., she stepped out of the hotel, surrounded by her team. A handful of reporters waited by the curb. She didn't wave. She didn't speak. Her posture said everything. Straight-backed, steady, focused. But the press conference still lay ahead, and soon, the entire country would hear Jasmine speak this time, not just for herself, but for anyone who had ever been told to stay quiet and smile. By noon, Jasmine Crockett's legal filing was everywhere, uploaded by court reporters, dissected by legal sites, passed around cable networks. Legal experts, political commentators, and former White House officials were already analyzing every page, like it was a Supreme Court verdict. But what struck them wasn't just the legal force of the lawsuit, it was the unmistakable intent behind it. It was the precision that stood out. In line 23, it stated, the defendant's remarks weren't aimed at debating policy, they were aimed at attacking a person, suggesting laziness, dishonesty, and a shared inferiority tied to a community identity. By line 41, it emphasized the fact that the comments were made live, broadcasted nationally, and fueled by a long-standing power imbalance between the parties, pushed the harm far beyond regular political sparring. Line 63 noted, the public record now shows the plaintiff's consistent professionalism and the defendant's calculated words, meant to insult and provoke. And in the last paragraph, it concluded clearly, this lawsuit isn't about political sides, it's about respect. When words wound and power protects the speaker, justice isn't just necessary, it becomes urgent. Cable news hosts read the filing aloud. Podcasts quoted it within hours. Screenshots of the lawsuit were everywhere, from Instagram stories to Facebook feeds and group chats nationwide. Jasmine wasn't watching it unfold. She was in a quiet meeting room at Toledo Central Library Menuza, location picked specifically for its neutral, accessible setting. The press conference space was simple. just a row of local book displays behind the podium. No flags, no campaign signs, only a wooden lectern, 2 microphones, and folding chairs. Inside, her team was making last-minute preparations. Lena clipped Jasmine's lapel mic in place, while Ari reviewed final points. Outside, security managed a slowly growing crowd, locals from Toledo who'd followed the story online, now gathering in person. Some carried signs, others just stood, waiting to hear her speak. Inside, Jasmine glanced at her notes one last time. "You don't need to read it word for word," Ari said. "Just say it like you wrote it." Jasmine smiled slightly. "I always do." At exactly 1 p.m., she approached the podium. The crowd outside went quiet almost instantly. She didn't start with a joke. She didn't thank anyone for coming. She looked directly at the cameras, scanned the room briefly, and began. "Yesterday, millions of Americans witnessed a moment that never should have happened in a professional space, a moment where someone in the highest office didn't debate policy but instead tried to degrade a person." She paused. The microphones captured the silence. "I have always served my community with care, with focus, and with facts. I sat at that round table to discuss housing, wages, and education, not to be called lazy or reduced to a stereotype on national television." There was a ripple of murmurs in the crowd. Jasmine continued. "This lawsuit isn't about dollars, it's about limits. It's about standing firm and declaring, publicly and clearly, that using language to tear down someone because of their identity or background must carry consequences." A reporter tried to interrupt with a question. Jasmine gently raised her hand, not to scold, but to pause. "I'll take questions in a moment," she said. "Let me finish." Then, without looking at her notes, she added something that wasn't planned. "Every time someone tells you to brush off comments like that, to be the bigger person, to just let it slide, they're asking you to give up your peace, to protect their comfort. I won't do that anymore." The crowd stirred, heads nodded. A few clapped. Lena, standing just out of frame, kept her eyes fixed on Jasmine, her shoulders steady. When Jasmine opened the floor for questions, hands shot up immediately. The first came from a national news reporter. "Congresswoman, are you seeking any apology from the Vice President?" Jasmine's reply was calm. "I'm not looking for words. I'm looking for accountability. Words didn't start this, and they won't end it." A second question came from a local newspaper. "What would you say to young women watching this, especially black girls?" Jasmine paused thoughtfully, then said, "You deserve every space you walk into. You don't owe anyone smallness just to make them comfortable. And if someone uses their power to belittle you, don't let them redefine your worth." That clip went viral before the press conference even ended. Outside, a teenage girl stood beside her mother, holding a sign that read, "Respect is a right, not a reward." She hadn't made the sign herself. It was a screenshot of Jasmine's post from that morning, printed and taped to cardboard with her mum's help. But even with the lawsuit filed and the press conference over, the true battle was just beginning. The Vice President's office wouldn't stay silent forever. As Jasmine left the podium, her words still echoed in the minds of those who'd just heard her speak. No theatrics, no yelling, just calm, direct truth. She walked toward her team without a word, the crowd quietly parting to let her pass. Outside, the media frenzy exploded. Satellite trucks from every major network were parked. Nearby, reporters were filing live updates. Producers were rushing to cover the story. Social media wasn't just sharing hashtags anymore, had turned into a full-blown movement. Yet what truly mattered wasn't the noise. It was the shift in the tone. Later that day, clips of Jasmine's speech aired not just on political shows, but on parenting podcasts, education programs, and even morning talk shows. One panel spent 15 minutes discussing her phrase, "You don't owe anyone smallness." One host called it the quote of the year. Another said it belonged in textbooks. Meanwhile, inside the Vice President's camp, cracks were showing. J.D. Vance had pulled back to his team's office in Indianapolis, locked in a long strategy meeting. Within 24 hours, 3 aides had quit. One leaked emails showing that staff had twice warned him about his language during shared panels with Jasmine Crockett. One leaked message read, "He gets triggered when she challenges him. You can see it coming." That sentence became part of the national conversation too. But Jasmine wasn't watching the leaks or the chaos that evening. She was in her hotel's quiet conference room, taking calls from faith leaders, civil rights lawyers, and educators from around the country. Some offered legal help, others simply called to thank her. One call came from a high school principal in Wichita. "We watched your speech in our 10th grade civics class today," she said. "They've never seen a politician handle something like that with so much grace and power." Jasmine smiled. "Tell them," she said warmly. "I used to teach middle school debate. You learn fast not to let your face show what you're thinking." The principal laughed. "They noticed," she replied. One of them said, "She didn't even blink. That's real power." Jasmine held on to that thought. Later that night, Lena walked in carrying 2 large folders. "The media response is mixed," she reported. "About 70% support you, but there's a small group calling it performative, saying you're chasing attention." Jasmine nodded. "They can say what they want. They weren't in that room. They don't know what it feels like to be spoken to like that on camera, in front of millions." Lena handed her the second folder. Letters, thousands of them both, printed and digital. One was from a woman in Charleston, who said she rewrote her resignation letter after watching Jasmine's speech. Jasmine flipped through them, different handwriting. Printed emails with subject lines like, "Thank you for standing up." One letter, handwritten on notebook paper, simply said, "Dear Jasmine, I saw you, and I believe you." Jasmine carefully folded that letter and tucked it into her notebook. By now, Ari had joined them, pacing the room with his phone pressed to his ear. "They're floating a statement," he said. "VP's team testing the waters on a clarification without taking blame." Jasmine didn't look up. "Let them try," she said firmly. "We're not bargaining for respect." Lena sat beside her. "It's working, Jazz. You didn't just respond, you changed the conversation." "No," Jasmine corrected softly. "The people did. I just gave them words for what they already felt." At 11:30 p.m., Brandon called with an update. A federal judge had approved an expedited review of the case. The weight of that news wasn't loud, but it was deep. It meant the court saw the case as serious. It meant J.D. Vance couldn't delay it for months. After the call, Jasmine powered off her phone and stepped out onto her hotel balcony. The city was quiet, now traffic light, buildings glowing in the distance. She stood there a long time, letting the breeze tug at her blazer. Behind her, Lena asked gently, "You ready for tomorrow?" Jasmine glanced back, calm and sure. "I've been ready," she said softly. "The question is, are they?" But with every passing hour, more people were standing with her, and that solidarity would soon prove more powerful than any insult spoken on a public stage. By Thursday morning, everything had changed. What started as a political scandal had become something more personal, more relatable. It wasn't just about Jasmine Crockett or J.D. Vance anymore. People saw their own experiences in what had happened, and they couldn't look away. Cable news still covered it, but now the story had spread. Beyond politics, it was in group chats between old friends. It was the topic of Sunday sermons. And in classrooms all across America, it became part of the national discussion. At a diner in Savannah, a waitress named Deborah asked a customer, "Did you catch what that man said to her?" In Minneapolis, some college students rewatched the full panel during a sociology class, pausing every few minutes to analyze the moment. At a barbershop in Albuquerque, 2 men argued whether this would actually lead to change or simply disappear like past incidents. But what nobody could ignore was how Jasmine's composed reaction struck harder than any loud response. Her calmness made people uneasy, but in the right way. She didn't cause a scene, didn't storm off. Instead, she left the insult hanging, openly for everyone to witness. In Portland, a retired journalist wrote an op-ed titled, "She Didn't Flinch, and That's Why It Hit So Deep." Former co-workers of J.D. Vance began speaking anonymously to reporters. Some said they weren't surprised. One mentioned, "He's always shown that attitude when dealing with women who don't conform." Then, an old clip from 3 years ago resurfaced. Vance, mid-interview, making remarks about lawmakers who confused drama with leadership. He hadn't named anyone, but after last week, it sounded louder. Meanwhile, Jasmine's office was flooded with media requests. She turned most of them down. "I already said what I needed to say," she told Lena. "If I go on every program now, it's just performance. I'm not here to sell myself." Instead, she picked one platform, a podcast hosted by Delaney Cruz, a journalist known for calm, unscripted, in-depth talks. They met in a St. Louis studio, 2 microphones between them. Delaney started softly. What stands out most to you about that moment when he said those words? Jasmine paused before answering. How quiet it got. Delaney leaned in. Quiet in the room. In my head, Jasmine replied. Everything froze. Not because I was speechless, but because I knew whatever I said next would be played on loop, over and over. Delaney nodded. And you chose silence. At first, I chose space, Jasmine said, to show his words weren't mine to carry. That episode reached over 3 million streams in its first week. In response, Vance's office gave a short statement 2 days later. No apology, no admission of fault, just a vague comment about respecting diverse opinions and moving forward. Together, it didn't land well. Even some in his party stepped back. One senator told reporters, "I wouldn't have said that," and he shouldn't have either. Another offered Jasmine quiet support behind the scenes. But beyond the political world, it was the people who mattered more. A postal worker in Cincinnati mailed her a handwritten letter. "We've never met, but watching you stand there reminded me of my grandmother. She never raised her voice but always commanded respect. She'd be proud of you." In Salt Lake City, middle schoolers painted a mural in their hallway with Jasmine's words in bold colors. "You don't owe anyone smallness." That then came a voicemail, left on her office line by a woman who didn't share her name. "I walked out of a meeting today, just left. I realized I've been swallowing comments like that for 2 decades. Thank you for reminding me I don't have to." This wasn't just noise, it was momentum. People began changing the way they spoke, responded, and valued their voices. Jasmine wasn't celebrating, it wasn't that kind of moment. She remained steady, still attending hearings, still drafting bills, still doing her job, as always. But beneath her calm steps, a movement was forming, quiet, but firm, as constant as breathing. By Monday, Jasmine Crockett was back at the Capitol. She didn't sneak in through side doors or hidden entrances. She walked straight through the front ID badge clipped, step steady, face unreadable dot inside. The atmosphere had shifted. People no longer hurried past her. They paused, met her eyes. A few nodded respectfully. Others whispered soft words as she passed. "Keep going. You handled that with grace." Even some lawmakers who'd never openly supported her before now offered discreet signs of solidarity, away from cameras and press. She didn't need the attention, but she noticed who stood up and who stayed silent. She wasn't keeping score out of spite, but for clarity. Jasmine wasn't asking for respect anymore. She was demanding it. That afternoon, during a private committee meeting on housing reform, she did what she always did, came prepared. She asked pointed questions, challenged lazy answers, and, as usual, let the facts speak louder than theatrics. But something had changed. No one cut her off, not once. Later, back in her office, she closed the door and sat at her desk. The sunlight streamed in, casting long shadows across the room. The lawsuit was still underway. Legal matters take time. But Jasmine wasn't waiting on court outcomes or statements. She'd already made her statement. Lena sat across from her, flipping through a folder. "Media outlets keep calling. We can either ignore them or pick selectively." Jasmine shook her head. "Let them breathe. Let this story unfold without my face on it. People already understand what happened." Outside, she saw a peaceful protest forming on the Capitol steps. Small, calm, mostly young women, some holding handmade signs, others just standing in quiet unity. It wasn't loud or chaotic. It was steady, grounded, a mirror of how she'd handled herself. A reminder, once you claim respect, it becomes hard to take away. Later that evening, Jasmine received a message from an elderly retired nurse in Birmingham, aged 83. It simply said, "I wish I'd known, back then, that silence wasn't my only option. You showed me that. I wish I had your voice, but I'm glad you're using it." Jasmine stared at that message for a long time. She didn't reply, not because she didn't care, but because she didn't need to. That message wasn't meant to spark a conversation. It was a gift. She opened her notebook, the same one she'd carried throughout everything, and flipped to a blank page. She wrote, "Silence isn't the same as peace, and boundaries aren't cruelty." She underlined it once. Behind her, Lena softly interrupted. "They're saying the VP might issue a regretful clarification." No actual apology, just a mild walk back. Jasmine didn't even glance up. "Let him," she said. "I'm not here for appearances." That night, the Capitol lights flickered against the early dusk. The building standing tall, as always, old, historic, imposing. But something inside had shifted. Not a revolution, not sweeping change, just a quiet realignment, a reminder that calm doesn't mean weak, that silence doesn't mean surrender, and that when someone crosses a line, you don't always have to shout to redraw it. This story had already grown beyond the lawsuit. It had turned into conversations between fathers and daughters, between teachers and students, between co-workers who'd let too many remarks slide, not because Jasmine had planned it, but because she let the moment speak. She trusted the truth to stand on its own, and it had. Respect isn't asked for, it's expected. And when it's denied, demanding it isn't dramatic, it's necessary. She closed her notebook, stood up, and turned off the light. Tomorrow, she'd be back at work, casting votes, reviewing amendments, questioning policies, but she'd walk those same halls, knowing something had shifted, not just in Congress, but far beyond it. And the next time someone tried to silence a voice like hers, there'd already be thousands of people listening, already watching, already ready.